Hey kids, how are you? Today's video is going to be a little bit different from the others because it's divided in three parts. Part 1, Bonnie and Clyde. Part 2, Sherlock Holmes. And Part 3 is a grammatical aspect of the class. So please pay close attention to the instructions I will give you on Facebook so you can watch this video in the correct order. Part 1. Hi, welcome. We're going to talk about a couple that is very, very famous in the United States, Bonnie and Clyde. They were a couple. They were actually involved with each other and they were criminals. So for years, they were romanticized as these partners in crime type of romance. So we're going to learn a little bit about this too. I want to do a disclaimer before we start, and it is that I am not incentivizing you to follow this behavior, but they are very famous. So I want you to know them because they are referenced a lot in pop culture. They have movies and TV shows and even video games that talk about them. So I think it is important for you to know this particular reference. Let's start with Bonnie. Bonnie Parker was born on October 1st, 1910 in Rowena, Texas, while Clyde Barrow was born on March 24th, 1909 in Tellico, Texas. They both died together on May 23rd, 1934 in Louisiana. Every single crime that this both committed was in the Great Depression. That's why they are remembered so much, because at that time, robbing a bank, it was an act of rebellion, and they did so several times. Bonnie was actually married to a man that ended up in prison for murder. She actually met Clyde there, and she smuggled a gun with which Clyde was able to escape and go after her. And that's when the crime spree started. After years and years on the road and being criminals, the FBI was able to locate them and kill them both in Louisiana. Now it's time for British culture. Welcome to part 2, where we're going to learn about Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is one of the most famous characters in the entire Britain history. He was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born on May 22nd, 1859 in Edinburgh, Scotland. He died on July 7, 1930 in Sussex, England. His most remembered accomplishment was the fact that he is the creator of Sherlock Holmes, who is the prototype of the modern detective. But he was not only a writer, he was actually a doctor too. He received a bachelor in medicine and also a master's in surgery qualifications. While he was a student, he met a doctor named Dr. Joseph Bell, who was well known because he never overlooked small details, and he was able to make accurate diagnosis by looking into these small details, by deducting. So these skills of observation and deduction were later translated to the features of the character Sherlock Holmes.
When I met you for the first time yesterday, I said Afghanistan or Iraq. You looked surprised.
Yes, how did you know?
I didn't know, I saw. Your haircut, the way you hold yourself says military. But your conversation as you entered the room
A bit different from my day.
said trained at Bart, so army doctor, obvious. Your face is tanned. But no tan above the wrists. You've been abroad but not sunbathing. Your limp's really bad when you walk, but you don't ask for a chair when you stand like you've forgotten about it. So it's at least partly psychosomatic. That says the original circumstances of the injury were traumatic. Wounded in action then. Wounded in action, suntan, Afghanistan or Iraq.
The first time Sherlock Holmes appeared into the public eye was in 1887, when Sir Arthur Conan was called A Study in Scarlet. It was pretty famous. It was really well received by the public. It became so popular that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle started to publish different adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which means he published novels or books of Sherlock, but also small cases every now and then in the magazine. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote novels, but also adventures, separate adventures that were later compiled in volumes. Here is an example. We have two separate books. A Study in Scarlet, that was the first ever novel published by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle about Sherlock. And then we have The Sign of Four. After that, we have a huge volume called Adventures of Sherlock. And as you see, there are a lot of cases that belong to that volume. These novels and adventures have been adapted for years into the big and the small screen. One of the most famous adaptations was the movie made by Robert Downey Jr.
Someone I want to see. Sherlock Holmes.
My personal favorite, however, is the BBC Sherlock TV show of 2012. I must confess that I'm a huge fan of this character. I actually own two of the volumes that were published. For example, here. I love it. This is volume 1 and this is volume 2. So for the sake of this video, I am going to talk about the characters and some basic plot lines of this character by comparing what I read on the book and what I saw on this TV show. On the book, he is described as a very slim, elegant man with a prominent nose and long fingers, and in the TV show he is played by Benedict Cumberbatch with a more modern twist to his appearance. He is described as a very cold man, a very logical man who has a skill of observation and deduction. He plays the violin, and unfortunately, he is a drug addict. The second main character is John Watson. He is a military and a doctor. He's very caring, he's kind, and he's the most human being in the entire book, especially when you compare him to Sherlock. He is Sherlock's best friend, and their dynamic is the entire story. In the novels and the adventures, John Watson is the narrator. So basically every single thing of Sherlock we know through John Watson. He is the writer of the book. So he is arguably one of the most important characters of the entire saga or series of Sherlock Holmes. If you find one of these topics particularly interesting, you can tell me and we can discuss it later in class. So thank you so much for watching. Bye!